Good evening and welcome to U.S. Consulate Karachi for tonight's discussion of waste to energy solutions. I'm Eileen Willingham. I'm an economic officer here at the consulate, and I welcome our participants who are here in person, as well as those of you who are joining us virtually. We're really excited to host this event, which gathers leaders from government, journalism, academia, and industry to explore the promises and challenges of converting waste to energy. We'll hear first from Consul General Mark Stroh, followed by the Provincial Minister of Sindh for Energy, Imtiaz Shaikh. Then Karachi Administrator Murtaza Wahab will give remarks. We'll next hear from an expert in the field, Dr. Kiril Hristovski of Arizona State University, and you can see him with the Arizona background up there on the screen. That'll leave us plenty of time for discussion, questions, and answers. We plan to alternate between taking questions from those of you who are present here in person and those of you on Zoom. You can enter your questions in the chat box, those of you who are joining us virtually, and my colleague Keome Rowe is monitoring that chat. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Consul General Mark Stroh.
Thank you. Thanks, Eileen. And let me just wish everyone a very good evening and thank everyone who's joining us virtually, but most particularly those of you who are joining us here in person in Karachi. A real fantastic gathering here and virtually of leaders that are already making a huge difference in the transition to clean energy. This might be the biggest gathering we've had in the consulate since the COVID outbreak. We are all vaccinated and as distant as we can be, and we're just thrilled to be able to bring everyone here together, and hopefully this is the first of many productive gatherings. I want to extend special thanks, of course, to our featured speakers this evening, Sindh Minister of Energy, Imtiaz Shaikh. Thank you, sir, and Karachi Administrator Murtaza Wahab. And of course, Dr. Kiril Hristovski of Arizona State University. Sir, we are so looking forward to hearing from you, all of us, and so I'll keep these remarks brief before we turn it over to the real experts, of which I'm most certainly not one. I would like to say, though, briefly, as a diplomat, I very rarely get the opportunity to talk trash. But here I am tonight, and I get to do that. So I'm going to make the most of this opportunity, although out of respect for Dr. Kiril, not too much trash. We've all seen discussions and decisions coming out of COP26 in Glasgow, and I think these are very much on all of our minds. And we're so hopeful that tonight's conversation not only helps inform us of challenges and opportunities in waste to energy, but also catalyzes meaningful action on projects and planning here in Karachi and throughout Sindh. Mitigating the effects of climate change is the most important challenge of our time, and one in which our two nations, particularly, are in very close agreement. Prime Minister Khan has been a strong voice about the impacts of climate change in Pakistan, and we certainly applaud Pakistan's very ambitious commitments to meet 60% renewable power generation in its total energy mix by 2030. That is an ambitious target, and we note the many new renewable energy projects that have come online just recently or have been announced as coming online very soon. And I know that several of you in the room are intimately involved in many of those, and so we thank you for that leadership and hope to see much more for both our countries. Waste to energy projects are a very promising addition to the energy mix. Wind, solar, hydro may get more press, but waste to energy can play a crucial role in reducing greenhouse gases, particularly compared to landfilling. While we are not going to agree here on the exact number of people living in Karachi, and I've asked many of the people in this room exactly how many there are, and there's wildly divergent answers. However, whatever number you think is the actual population, I think we can all agree that it's a lot of people. They're producing a lot of trash. Figures we've seen for how much waste is produced in the city range from 9,000 to 16,000 tons per day. And I look forward to learning more from our experts about how to generate clean energy from all that waste and how we can partner together to develop the waste to energy sector. We'll hear from local solid waste experts on what they're doing and what they have planned to convert municipal solid waste, that's a fancy diplomatic way to say garbage, to produce energy at plants across Karachi. We're going to learn what makes up all that solid waste. That includes biomass from paper, cardboard, food waste, organic matter, and wood, combustible materials like plastics, and non-combustible items like glass and metal. Besides reducing greenhouse gases and producing electricity, there are other good reasons to process municipal waste. By reducing the amount of material that will be buried in landfills or just disposed of elsewhere, perhaps tossed to sea, waste to energy projects can contribute to creating a cleaner, healthier Pakistan. Projects like these also open the door to greater private sector engagement in mitigation actions with increased opportunities for investment and employment. Waste to energy projects can contribute to Pakistan achieving energy independence through access to affordable and sustainable energy. In addition to the significant environmental benefits, waste to energy also presents a significant economic opportunity. Several widely quoted market analyses last year estimated the value of global waste to energy market at more than $35 billion worldwide, with the potential to grow to more than $50 billion by 2027. That potential is evident in Karachi, growing energy demand and, it must be said, an abundant supply of source material. Here in Sindh, there's growing recognition that one man's trash is another man's treasure, a very rich energy source, as evidenced by an increasing number of exciting new developments in waste to energy. We were particularly excited to hear the news last week that the Chief Minister of Sindh and the Cabinet approved a policy on the use of solid waste for energy production. And that is a perfect segue to pivot to the real experts. I'd like to turn things over now to the gentleman on my right, Sindh Energy Minister Imtiaz Shaikh, to talk to us about how waste to energy fits into plans for Sindh's development and broader environmental goals. Mr. Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mark. And good evening, everybody here, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have gathered here to discuss a very important aspect of our society, our government, and especially for this city, that is waste to energy, the project for which we have formulated a policy. Last week, Cabinet approved that, and very soon we are going to implement it. This is a very important thing that we were discussing since many years, and I would say that as Energy Department, Government of Sindh has always been the leading and the forerunner in the energy projects in the Pakistan. So in this field as well, Government of Sindh has taken the lead, and we have formulated the policy, and we will be keep it improving it as the time passes and the new developments do occur in the society and the places where it is already established. So we are open for the projects to come in, and Karachi is the biggest city of Pakistan and is the provincial capital. So we have this issue since many months and years we have been discussing on this. And at last, we have come to the conclusion that let's go and do it. So for that, we needed a policy. We have formulated a policy, and there the figure you told about garbage we are collecting daily, according to the information with the Government of Sindh, it is 10,000 to 11,000 tons of the garbage, which has been solid municipal waste, which has been collected all over the city and then dumped in the two sites here in Karachi. One is Gond Pass and another is Jam Chakro. More than 500, approximately 500 acres. And since years we have been dumping our solid waste in that in these sites. So we plan to have, so as far as our estimates are concerned, and our consultants have advised us that we can go up to the 200 megawatt for the electricity. But we have other plans for using this solid waste management, RDF, and as also you mentioned, some of the few. So it's just opened, we have just opened a new avenue for making the city clean and green. The main object of establishing these solid waste projects just to clean the city. This is the main issue here with us in Karachi, and in other big cities like internationally it has been also established that this is the best way to dispose of our solid waste and make use of it. And it will open a lot of new business avenues for a lot of people here, right, from small one to bigger one. So we have started it, and very soon we are going to announce it, and we'll be calling for any unsolicited proposals or any proposals when we will apply. We'll just open for the bidding, competitive bidding. So very soon we are going to do this, and the Sindh has, as I previously said, has taken the lead into it. So we will do it, and we plan to keep it till the 30 to 40 or 50 megawatt. We'll keep it up to 50 megawatt project, so that in the beginning we can have 3 or 4 projects here in Karachi, and then we'll extend it to the other parts of the province like Hyderabad, Shaikh, Larkana, Bukhas. So to begin with, we will be starting it from Karachi, and we hope that today we are meeting, we will discuss and see how we can get some other good ideas to implement it. So this is a new project, and it has been covered in the ARE policy, which has been passed last year, 2019, ARE 2019, and these unsolicited proposals are also been covered up into that, and I think this will be the first ever project of solid to waste, conversion of solid municipal waste to energy in Pakistan. So again, we are taking lead in it, and today a lot of friends are sitting here, and they've been working with us, and we think that in public-private partnership, and we will be able to take it to the heights, and we will clean our city, provide a clean energy. And Pakistan is committed as far as the Paris Agreement, the other agreement, we have signed it.
The microphone, I think, just went off. You can press the button.
Can't take a vote?
No. Just show the red light should come on.
So, we are a signatory to the international protocols and the agreements for the clean energy, and we are on it. And Sindh is again blessed with the wind corridor, and we have been doing solar. Again, batteries. Again, so we've been doing it as far as clean energy is concerned. Sindh is the only province to have a wind corridor. Pakistan has a wind corridor, but due to the lack of infrastructure, which is the only place here near Jhampi, which we visited at his back. And we have solar as well. We are coming in the solar. Hydro has been included in ARE policy, though initially it was not, but with that, it is about 60% of the mix, energy mix will be solar. So we have been again 400 in this field as well, in the ARE alternate energy field, and we're doing a lot of enterprising things here in the province with the Angro. We have just signed totally to open the market, private market. We have planned and signed an MOU for producing the electricity by the Angro, and lines to be laid by Sindh HTDC, Sindh Transmission and Dispatch Company, and totally private buyers. So this will be totally a new thing. So as I said, the Sindh has been the lead in the energy sector, and inshallah, we will keep on leading the province of Sindh will be keep on leading in Pakistan and in the energy sector. So we are open to the discussion, and we will be listening to the expert views on this solid waste management thing. And Murtaza Wahab is very much perturbed over this solid waste thing, and it will help him in cleaning the city. And this will be and even in the province, we will take it to other parts of the province as well. So hopefully, inshallah, very soon we are going to take it up, and we pray and for the success of it. And Sindh is totally committed for the clean and green energy, and we'll be doing it. And by the years, some countries have mentioned 2030, some have mentioned 2050. So let us see till when we are going to eliminate the CO2 projects from our economic activities. So I think Murtaza Wahab will be telling better how the city is needed, and we are always there. We have always been supporting the private sector who has been coming to us for the help, and in this field as well, in any other field. Energy Department can play a lead role in it, and we can operate as a one-window operation to be done in the Energy Department for any investors, any foreign investors, local investors, private sector. So the government of Sindh has been always doing it, and our Chief Minister is also very supportive in this, and he has been giving me a full support in bringing all these new things in the department and the energy sector. So thank you very much for inviting us today, and thank you very much everybody who has been listening to this, and we will discuss and see that how we can achieve something new and something good for our projects in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And now over to Karachi Administrator Imtiaz Wahab.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Majority of the things have been conveyed by the Honorable Energy Minister with regards to the commitment of Government of Sindh, with regards to what the waste to energy policy is all about, and how Sindh has taken the lead in being the first province to formulate such a policy. Just to bring certain things on record, Karachi right now, the estimated figures, as Shaikh Saab was conveying, were approximately 11,000 tons of solid waste is collected every day, which is deposited at the two landfill sites. However, this is not for the entire city. There are two districts still remaining which are not with solid waste. So hopefully from the 15th of November, the 6th district of Karachi, which is Korangi, will be added to this grid. And hopefully in the next 30 days from 15th November, we would have another district, which is District Central, which would be added. So approximately we would be touching about 13.5 to 14,000 tons of solid waste every day, which will be deposited at our landfill sites. The good thing with the formulation of this policy is that until the policy was formulated, we were at the receiving end of only collecting waste, and we were not actually doing anything about it. And let me just take you back to 2018 when the new government had come in. A lot of people had approached the provincial government. SN had also come to the provincial government with proposals that the solid waste can be utilized for creating energy. However, the framework was not available. There were certain regulatory issues with regards to this issue. So hopefully with the passage of this new waste to energy policy, we would overcome these bottlenecks and there would be a proper regulatory framework available for such projects to happen. So Karachi would be standing at about 14,000 tons of solid waste. The Sindh Solid Waste Department has also now started collection procedure in District Larkana. We also have Sakhar and Hyderabad division. So the number will continue to rise. So the supply of solid waste is available. It only is up to the Energy Department now, Solid Waste Department, and the private investors to come forward to work together with proper synergy so that we can actually have this cheap and safer form of fuel available in the province, and hopefully then it can create or it can be replicated for other provinces as well. Sindh is lucky to have a very proactive transmission and dispatch company which is being led by the Honorable Minister of Energy. We were the first province to have established the transmission and dispatch company, and I feel that such projects would again be very helpful because of such dispatch companies, as the Energy Department will also now enter into an agreement with Engro for renewable energy. So the vision that the political government had with regards to such initiatives is now beginning to bear fruit, where the coal energy has turned into reality now. We have the wind corridor, which is working very effectively. Approximately about 1,300 megawatts are being produced, and the potential is, I think, up to 5.5 to 6,000 megawatts.
1,200 more is coming up.
Okay, 1,200 more is coming up. So Sindh is proactive in dealing with such projects, and I feel that with the transmission and dispatch company working with the provincial government, working under the provincial government, it will be easier for such projects to actually end up supplying electricity to various entities. So this shows the resolve and commitment of the provincial government to work with private entities, to work with all sorts of stakeholders so that we can create an environment which is conducive for our future generations, and also reiterate our commitment with international organizations that we've signed as a country, as the government of Pakistan has signed with various countries. So hopefully I look forward to engaging with all of these entities, people that you've also invited, to bring about this positive change, to meet the energy needs, energy requirements, the energy needs of the people of Sindh, to provide them with cheap electricity, safer electricity, and that's what the future is all about. So hopefully I would be learning a lot from the experts and then take it forward to the government. So you have my word from the Law Department of Government of Sindh, the Energy Department of Government of Sindh, that we are ready and fully committed to work with people so that we can turn this dream into actual reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Administrator Wahab. And I'm going to turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies for tonight, Eileen. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I'd like now to introduce our expert speaker from the United States, who's on the screen with us, Dr. Kiril Hristovski. He is the program chair of the Environmental and Resource Management Program and an associate professor of engineering and environmental and resource management programs in the Polytechnic School, one of the 7 Fulton Schools of Engineering at Arizona State University. He also serves as the director of ERM, that was the chair of Environmental and Resource Management Program for professional development at that Polytechnic School. And he's the coordinator of the Water Resource Management Certificate Program, which is co-organized with Agribusiness and Water Council of Arizona. Dr. Hristovski holds a PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering and a Master's of Science and Technology from Arizona State University and a Bachelor of Science of Chemical Engineering from the University of St. Kiril and Methody in Skopje, Republic of North Macedonia. His research topics focus on solid waste and hazardous waste management, environmental applications and implications of engineered nanomaterials, water and wastewater treatment and management, and international environmental management issues. He's actively engaged in researching the environmental challenges of the developing world and translating fundamental knowledge into simple and inexpensive solutions to address these challenges. He's the recipient of a Presidential Medal of Merit for Macedonia, a Fulbright Fellowship, and College Award for Outstanding Faculty Mentor and Teacher, and a U.S. Presidential Academic Award by President George Bush Sr., among many other awards. Dr. Hristovski, we're so pleased to have you with us today. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank
For your kind introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to share my presentation, and I'm going to start with the first slide and go from there. So as a former Fulbright Fellow, I am grateful that I have an opportunity to collaborate on these efforts to expand our diplomatic engagements from a perspective of science and knowledge, because I believe that a lot of these efforts that the State Department is doing and our nation is doing are critical in building bridges and friendships and learning from each other and helping our partners to learn from our experiences, but also we should be at the same time learning from the experiences that they have. So when I talk about solid waste, and I'm going to be talking specifically on waste to energy, but I'm going to focus also on solid waste, how the solid waste impacts, because this was what I was asked to talk about in today's presentation. When I talk about solid waste, not only waste to energy, I always tell my students that it's a techno-economic endeavor. And I typically say, well, one thing that I want you to always take from my class is that waste is not a nuisance. Waste is not something that we don't want, but waste is actually a resource. And as such, we should be looking at the resource of this resource from a perspective of being in a form of money, in a form of dollars, in a manner of speaking. So I'm going to take the same approach, and I'm going to talk about, as I was asked, I'm going to talk about the solid waste management system from a perspective of waste to energy, and how do we take these waste to energy technologies that are typically being used in the United States, and different types of technologies that are being used, and how they are embedded or grafted. I like to use this word grafted because it's critical for a technology or for a system to properly work. It is critical that we have the proper infrastructure, and that infrastructure doesn't necessarily have to be a technical infrastructure such as roads. It has to be legal infrastructure, and also what I like to call human infrastructure. So without much ado, I'm gonna, let me see. There it is. Okay. So without much ado, I like to start with defining what a waste to energy is. And I'm going to use a broad definition. And the reason why I like to define things is because oftentimes people come from different perspectives, and specific terminology, specific concepts may mean differently to different things to different people. So waste to energy is an extraction of energy from combustible waste for beneficial uses, while simultaneously reducing adverse environmental impacts. Now, the bottom line in this definition is it's the hidden energy that is stored in reduced carbon. And a lot of our resource, I wouldn't even call it a waste, but resource that comes from waste is embedded in this carbon. The more reduced carbon we have, we can oxidize it, and during this oxidation process, we can extract the energy from it. So we have typically energy from solid waste, whether the solid waste is a municipal, whether this is an institutional solid waste. We also may have special waste or hazardous waste. All of these different types of waste, to a greater or lesser extent, may have different energy content because of their different compositions and different levels of reduced carbon embedded inside of these wastes. And as such, we can extract that energy, and at the same time minimize these environmental impacts. So bottom line is that we can have energy that is embedded into these resources, into solid waste, and this energy actually can be translated into money. So oftentimes I say that the primary driver of solid waste, or waste to energy specifically, is the economics. It's not an environmental focus primarily as much as economics. So there are also environmental benefits, which is very good when we can have multiple solutions, make money at the same time, and then provide environmental solutions. So for example, you've mentioned in your talks waste volume reduction, and this can affect landfill cost savings. So for example, if you can reduce the amount of waste that is being generated through extracting the energy and reducing the volume of the waste throughout this process, you can you can extend the life of a landfill by 10, 20, 30 years, and oftentimes that translate into reducing costs of operations and management of that landfills. But one of the hidden environmental benefits that oftentimes I think many people neglected is the greenhouse gas emission reduction. And a lot of the solid waste that we have has organic content that can be easily transformed into methane or similar GHGs, greenhouse gases. A simple example of that would be a biosolids type of waste that is being generated, or organic waste that is being deposited in a landfill. And over 10, 20, 30 years, this landfill can act as a bioreactor and can emit huge amounts of methane. 50% of the gases that are typically generated have methane. Or should I say 50% of the gases that are being generated from a landfill is actually methane. And methane is a major problem because it has a global warming potential of at least 4 times than the carbon dioxide. So by taking this carbon and converting it into more oxidized form, such as, for example, carbon dioxide, we're actually able to not only extract the energy, but also reduce the global warming potential that is being, or should I say, the global warming gas release that is being introduced into the environment. And one of the other things is that at the same time, we can reduce the use of fossil fuels. And this is sometimes critical because the use of fossil fuels can contribute to much greater pollution as a result of emissions, not only of carbon dioxide, but sulfur dioxide emissions, NOx emissions, and so on. And I'm going to briefly touch on all of these. So when we talk about waste to energy, I like to take a systems approach. And we oftentimes in engineering talk about a mass or energy balance system, but considering that there is energy embedded in this mass, in this resource, in this solid waste, and there is also cost, or should I say money, that can be extracted from that energy, we can also translate this very easily that the waste to energy system is an economic system. So as every system, it has its own elements or subsystems within that systems that are interconnected, and a simple flow chart or subsystem description and the connection between these subsystems is presented here on this slide. So we typically go from waste, and from this waste, we can extract a resource, which we oftentimes call refuse-derived fuel. And then this refuse-derived fuel can get incinerated or can be processed. And then heat is the primary product of this process that can be then used for heating or can be directly converted for electricity. But there are also unwanted byproducts such as fly ash and air pollutants. And then we also have bottom ash that we need to worry about disposal. So all of these elements within the system, this mass energy balance system or economic system, are interdependent, which means that the kinetics or how things are happening in one element within the system can affect significantly, or not as significantly, but typically significantly, what's going to happen in the next element of the system. A simple example of that would be, let's say we are not generating enough waste, so we cannot generate refuse-derived fuel, so we had to shut down the incinerator. So the issues associated with the first element of the system will affect the third and then the fourth element of this system. And incinerators are not something that we can just turn on and turn off like a solar panel and start generating electricity. It takes some warm-up time, several days sometimes, to get everything going, the boilers going, and so on. So this system is controlled or directed, is more proper terminology, by a set of technological and non-technological factors. And as engineers, typically people who are in this field focus on the technological factors, but oftentimes it's the non-technological factors that can make or break the implementation or drafting of a system within a specific environment. So what I would like to do is kind of take first at the technological factors and look at how the connections between these subsystem units work together, and what are the specific factors, or should I say specific questions, that we have to ask about these factors that we need to consider for this system to be properly implemented and operating long-term. Because when you build a system, this system is supposed, for waste to energy system, this system is supposed to be working for 20, 30, 40 years. And oftentimes this becomes a much greater challenge than just implementing and building the technology into a specific ecosystem. Because there are plenty of companies today that they're doing a great job in the United States. There are plenty of companies that do a great job in providing the technological solutions. But in order for that technological solution to work to its optimum, it has to be provided the environment so it can be grafted and the maximum efficiency can be achieved. So one very important thing that we have to consider is when we generate the waste, before we can turn the waste into refuse-derived fuel, we have to consider the multiple steps of a solid waste management systems. And here in the green is what we call in the solid waste management system the 6 functional elements of an integrated solid waste management system. And as you can see, they're interconnected and they depend on each other. So when we generate the waste, which is basically when we generate the waste, we have to think about how we're going to store it on site, how we're going to collect that solid waste. Are we going to use small containers, large containers? Are we going to use trucks? Are we not going to we're going to use smaller vehicles and so on? And oftentimes people neglect these factors. I'm going to just use a simple example that we've observed in one of our studies in Kabul, Afghanistan. I had a student who was working on issues related to the solid waste management system of Kabul, Afghanistan. One of the very interesting things that we kind of found is that there was a donation by a European country that provided storage containers for storage and collection of solid waste, and yet the vehicles that they had in Kabul to collect the waste from these storage containers and transport it into a transfer station, to the landfill, were not compatible. So what they were doing is they would collect the solid waste and then they would dump it on the street and then put it with shovels onto big trucks and transport it. So this created operational problems. So once we collected the solid waste, we need to consider how we're going to process, how we're going to recover the materials that are important for us that we can utilize as a resource, and how we're going to transport and transfer them to specific locations, whether this location is a disposal in a landfill, or we're going to be able to take it as a resource to produce fuel. So generating the fuel has to go through all of these steps that oftentimes can make and break the connection between these two elements in a waste to energy system, which is the waste to refuse derived fuel. So oftentimes critical questions that we have to ask ourselves are, what kind of waste do we have? What's the type of waste? What is the composition? What is the energy content of this waste? How much carbon, in a manner of speaking, is in the waste? What is the oxidation state of carbon? Because if there are impurities that it cannot be incinerated, if there is a high oxidated state of carbon in the fuel, then we might not be able to extract enough energy or as we want to. A simple example of that is polymers, plastics. Plastics have a much lower, much more reduced carbon than, for example, lignin-based materials such as paper. So consequently, polymers, plastics that are not readily biodegradable, that can stay in a landfill for eons, can provide much higher energy content than, for example, paper. Another very important factor when we deal with converting the waste to refuse-derived fuel is the characteristics with respect to its physical components. What is the particle size? What are the number of non-combustibles? Oftentimes, people neglect these things and they're not aware that shredding may be required, and the shredding may be a major stumbling block where a lot of the problems can happen. So the smaller the particle size is, the combustion, the incineration process, and the energy extraction process is going to be more efficient. But at the same time, the reduction in particle size will require a lot of energy to shred it and a lot of technology. I'm going to give you a simple example from an operational perspective. I was visiting a number of years ago a incinerator in Massachusetts, beautiful facility, 60 megawatt facility. And the main problem that they had was shredding of the refuse-derived fuel, or should I say, the waste, because a lot of people will throw things that can cause fires or things that can cause explosions. People were throwing propane tanks in, and occasionally these propane tanks will be missed, and when they're shredded, they will cause an explosion. So this is a typical example of proper characterization that of the solid waste can alleviate a lot of these problems. And then collection, selection, and transport, whether you're going to do it off-site or on-site, what is the infrastructure? These are critical elements within the process of converting waste to refuse-derived fuel, because they will affect the supply chain. Not only it is important to produce enough waste and keep that waste, or should I say refuse-derived fuel, but what is the quality of that fuel? What are the supply alternatives that have to be considered when we talk about the supply chain? Because as I said, if one of these elements fails or it's stopped, the other elements that are in this chain will eventually be stopped, and now you have manufacturing, energy generation issues. So it is critical to create a complete characterization of the solid waste system in order to be able to provide enough resources for these waste to energy systems to be properly working without interruptions. And this is oftentimes what is being asked, or one of the factors that is being asked by partners who are interested in investing into these types of systems through a public-private partnership and so on. So let's look at now some of the technological factors, but we're going to look now from from RDF to incineration. So we're going to look at these types of these two, the connection between these two elements. So the refuse-derived fuel will actually dictate what kind of incinerator we're going to have. What is the design, the incineration process? So if you're going to be partnering with a specific company to install, to build, and manufacture the technology for you, they will have to know what are the refuse-derived fuel characteristics, and not only with a point in time, but also what are the trends of what are the trends or changes that can happen within the characteristics of the refuse-derived fuel. Now, most commonly, the most common type of refuse-derived fuel waste, we use great incinerators, and these are typically for incineration of municipal type, institutional type of solid waste. Oftentimes we may have agricultural solid waste, like for example, leftovers from grape production or something, because it contains a lot of carbon. So they're very, very good, and they're most commonly used. Now, if you're going to be incinerating what we like to call fluffy type of refuse-derived fuel or biosolids, it's a completely different types of technology that possibly is the best solution. And this is a fluidized bed incinerator. So you can see here a couple of different pictures where we have great incinerator. It's basically the great incinerator will have a pit. It will be shredded, typically waste that is being burned onto a grate, and then the energy is being extracted through capturing it in some kind of a fluid, which is typically water, and then is being converted into energy. There is ash being generated, but the burning happens on a grate. So processes that control, or should I say, not processes, but the process is controlled, the factors that control the process depends primarily on this process over here, on the burning on the grate. In contrast, in the fluidized bed incinerator, we have to have a fluffy type of material that can be pushed up into the chamber above by some kind of fluid, typically an air, that is being pushed, and this provides nice mixing, that provides nice incineration process and complete oxidation, and this exhaust gas now keeps has the heat and is being transferred into some kind of a medium such as water, and then you can generate steam and electricity from there. Now, if you have a lot of special bulk type of waste or even hazardous waste, maybe rotary kiln incinerator that are kind of coupled, and these are typically industrial incinerators that are coupled with energy extraction system, may be the best solution. Plasma arc incinerators are some of the more interesting types of technology. They can be very, very expensive, where you can use to not only produce syngas, and there's a lot of incineration technologies that can produce syngas, and I saw that there is an interest in the policy that I was sent. Eileen sent it to me a couple of days ago. There's interest in syngas. So now what can happen is we can produce the syngas in plasma arc incinerators or different types of pyrolysis processes where we can immobilize the hazardous material component in a a kind of glass-like material. We vitrify it, as we call it, and then we can use the syngas to produce energy, to transport it to another place potentially. And there's different modifications of these incineration processes. As I said previously, it will depend on the specifics of the ecosystem that may exist and the specific of the waste. And there's plenty of technology. I know in the United States, there are a number of technologies that can provide a fantastic solutions that are specifically tailored for the needs that are presented to them. So energy generation basically is either we're generating heat or electricity. And so we have to answer questions. Where are we going to use this? Were we going to use it as to heat buildings, houses, central heating? Are we going to use it for greenhouses? Are we going to use it for industrial processes and operations or commercial applications? What are the consumers? And now oftentimes kind of hidden in all of these questions is the questions related to the infrastructure. It's not only the technical infrastructure, but it's the legal infrastructure, because the operation of management of this infrastructure, once the system is embedded into the local environment, the operation and management can presents itself to be a significant cost, because you have to operate and manage the system for 10, 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years. And then when you're generating not only heat, but you're generating electricity, there's additional factors that have to be considered. What is the efficiency? And the efficiency from thermodynamics, we know it depends on the difference between a hot and a cold sink. And oftentimes this is kind of neglected, because it will require, to create a difference between a hot and a cold sink, it will require access to cooling water. So we have to know, is there any temperature, what is the local temperature, so local climate? Is there any temperature discharge standards that we have to consider? So all of these things kind of are in the background, but can help optimize a system or build the proper system. And then when we talk about consumers, when we talk about electricity, we always, our main goal is to sell that electricity to consumers. And in order to be able to do that, we also have to have a technical and legal infrastructure. And then what is the cost associated with this? And this time, oftentimes, is the stumbling block, because people would say, well, it's much cheaper for me to buy electricity from a, let's say, a nuclear power plant than from waste to energy electricity generation system. Now, from an environmental perspective, and this is what, as an environmentalist, I kind of always try to focus, is we have byproducts, and these byproducts oftentimes can represent big headaches on how we manage them. So we typically have, during an incineration process, we have a fly ash and we have air pollutants. And in the United States, we have regulations. For example, 1990 Clean Air Act in the United States will have an emissions standards for hazardous air pollutants, which we call NESHAPs, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. We also have National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And a lot of these standards will regulate what kind of emissions we are allowed to put out into the atmosphere. So for example, in the United States in the 80s, there was a major problem with acid rain. And so what happened is we passed the 1990 Clean Air Act and Title IV, which reduced the sulfur dioxide and NOx emissions. We were able to reduce the impacts of acid rain. But also in the fly ash, there's a lot of particulate matter. Uncombusted materials oftentimes represent a problem. So GHG emissions, improper combustion, inadequate oxidation or incomplete oxidation, a lot of these carbon-containing materials can produce chemicals that can be extremely carcinogenic. A simple example of that would be that if you don't have a complete combustion, we can produce furans and dioxins, and these can be extremely carcinogen. So to remove all of these air pollutants that can cause problems, not only with the environment, with our health too, we need to install air pollution control units. So as you can see, a lot of these technologies oftentimes primarily will focus on reducing the air pollution through these air pollution control units. And these can be scrubbers, bag houses, electrostatic precipitators, and location can also play a critical role. So the design, operation, and management and cost of all of these air pollution control units can oftentimes be significant, and it needs to be tailored to what the needs, and especially what type of refuse-derived fuel and oxidation process, or should I say incineration process you have.
Dr. Hristovski, it's Eileen in Karachi. It's Eileen in Karachi. I just wanted to say thanks so much for the presentation so far, and we'd really like to leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm wondering if, I think you just have a couple of slides left.
Yeah, I do. I can speed it up. I'm sorry, professors. We as professors like to talk. So bottom ash, is it generated hazardous waste or is it not? In the United States, we have a regulation that can be that controls these issues. So oftentimes there are non-technological factors for successfully implementing waste to energy platforms, and I can answer a lot of these factors in our question and answer sessions. But you need to have an efficient and effective legal infrastructure. Basically, in the United States, we have command and control that is by the role of our government, and we need to have a strong judicial branch, because this is what partnership requires: clear laws and regulations, and supporting physical infrastructure, trained personnel, workforce, stable solid waste management system, uninterrupted supply chain, steady state of supply, quality of refuse-derived fuel, and long-term commitment, political stability, economic stability, because partners, when they invest, they want to be sure that their investment is going to pay off. It's critical to have environmental laws and regulations. In the United States, there's multiple regulations that focus on waste to energy, air pollution, solid waste management, water management. They're clear jurisdiction, clear command and control, and I'll explain that in the questions and answers session. Oftentimes, neglecting education and training can make and break a system, because you may have deficient workforce that needs to be operating and managing the system, and public engagement in environmental issues and criticals. So economic regulations and policies, tax, economic infrastructures, free and available markets, not only for selling the energy, but also refuse-derived fuel purchasing and so on. So with that, I went a little bit overboard. I wasn't paying attention, and I'm ready to take questions. As I said, professors, we like to talk, and we sometimes forget ourselves.
Dr. Hristovski, it's Eileen in Karachi. Again, I'm a former professor, so I know all about that. And I just want to thank you for your presentation, and I just want to thank you for touching on the policy drivers, the technical factors, and also the economics of waste to energy. And now we're going to turn it over to our questions, and I can bring the microphone around to the folks in the room, and we can go back and forth between our participants in the room and our participants online. So if there's anyone in the room who would like to ask a question or start the discussion, we can start here. And I do know there are some questions online. So, Kamran?
Hi, Professor. I had a question that you talked about the incinerator. So, I mean, you talked about the categorization of the waste, but for a city of Karachi, which has a large amount of waste, which one would be the most suited? Is it dependent on the heating value? Because some of them were combustible, but for a size of a incinerator required here, you would have to have one which can burn the maximum, categories of waste.
Okay, so I don't know the composition of the Karachi solid waste. But I'm going to use an example kind of to illustrate what you should be focusing on. What we found out when we did an analysis on the solid waste system in Kabul, we found out that the solid waste was barren from materials that can be readily used as a refuse-derived fuel. So all the wood, all the plastics, all the paper was actually being taken by people throughout a recycling and let's call it a resource recovery type of activities, that the majority of the composition of the solid waste in Kabul consisted of biosolids and construction and demolition waste, basically bricks, mortar, and so on. So from that perspective, you know, there would be one solution that is more applicable, like for example, something that can create methane or anaerobic digestion, and then anaerobic digestion being converted into methane, and then methane being incinerated to produce electricity. But typically, most typically in the United States, what we typically use are great incinerators. So I would encourage that you have a good composition characterization of the solid waste, so you know what kind of waste. And typically you find out how much paper, how much plastic it is, how much wood is in there. And the rule of thumb is that if you have a waste that has a higher heating value, moisture than smaller than 50%, and solids that after the incineration is less than 40 to 50%, you can typically use great type of systems for incineration, but you don't need to use some kind of a auxiliary fuel like coal. And this is something that I want you to be always vigilant of. It's oftentimes people will say, and this happened to me when I was asked by a colleague from Serbia, says, well, there was an Asian country proposing in Serbia what they were about waste to energy system, but they were not seeing, the people were not seeing that they were actually waste to energy system that used 50% coal. And that you should be aware of these little intricacies, what needs to be done. First question that I would answer is, what is your composition? How does it change over time? How does it collected? What is the energy content? What is the waste generated after incineration? That would be my first question, but I would suspect that great type of incinerators would be probably the best solution. On a hunch. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And I think we'll turn to a question from a member of our virtual audience, Keome.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So the first question is from an audience member that unfortunately had to leave, but still wanted their question answered since it's being recorded. And it is for the for Minister Shaikh, actually, during his remarks. Which contractual model are you planning to apply on these waste to energy projects in Karachi? Is it going to be a public-private procurement process based on a BOT concept?
See, it is just we have started the process. We have formulated the policy and we'll be waiting for the project developers to come up and approach us or unsolicited proposals. But we would definitely like that we can have both the models, whatever is the best suited to our laws and to the environment here. One is the public-private partnership, or private developers or any international developers approaches us. We will consider that, and we are waiting for the developers to come up and contact us. After a couple of days, some days we will be coming up in the media for inviting things, or unsolicited proposals can come up to us anytime.
Thank you. Mr. Musico had a follow-up, which was electricity tariffs under a PPA will probably not suffice to make the project bankable. There should be a waste fee additional revenue for the waste to energy project. Who will pay for the waste fee? Thank you.
And Keome, was that a question for the minister as well?
Yes.
There is no waste fee as a policy. No? Waste is for free.
Yeah, the waste is free, and there's no fee for the waste. We just want to clean our cities, and we are spending money for that. So we will not charge any fee for the waste to be got from the developer.
That's part of the incentive.
We have incentives in it, in the policies, and this is one of the part of it. You want to talk?
Thanks. Yes, Managing Director of Solid Waste Board.
Thank you very much. There's no question, but just to clarify that we have recently conducted the complete waste characterization study of the Karachi. And by and large, the result we have got from the SGS, one of the laboratories here, we have done two ways. One is the all the GTS stations with the middle and collection point. We've done the segregated studies there, and also at the landfill sites. And just for the consumption of the Professor Saab, who has just given us the detailed presentation, and just for overall the total moisture content which we have got here is not more than 45 to 50% here, and then the volatile which is more required here is almost more than the 45% to 50% of the total waste we are collecting. And it's true that the way you have already given the major recyclable material here also in Karachi is segregated through the informal sector, but by and large the overall percentage of the organic waste we have is more than 45%, which makes it more volatile and combustible. And the kilocalorific value which we have collected is more than 2,400 to 3,000 kilocalorific value here we have calculated, and that's also a detailed calculation we have done in Karachi by collecting more than 50 samples from different sites. So we internally think that the solid waste content available here in Karachi are suitable for having and installing a good waste to energy projects, good for the RDF component as well as for the waste to electricity projects if there's going through. We also have, based on the studies we have done, we got multiple interest, not only from the Chinese company, but also recently a couple of Danish companies have also approached. They've gone through the documents. They have also submitted their proposals here. That's looking into the potentials. That's why the energy department and the government have decided, and that's why the energy policy recently was approved by the government. And we are very hopeful that we will get the good potential projects to implement here in Karachi.
Thanks. Is there another question from a participant in the room?
Sure.
Okay, so Andy Rebold, USAID Director, Karachi.
Hi, I have a question for the professor, and bear with me because I'm a layperson. I've only seen this happen in the country of Finland, where they take the consumer packaging, like plastic packaging of 4 municipalities, and they send it to the municipality of Vantaa, which is just the north of the capital. It's where the airport is. And they use that to generate 40 to 60%, I forget the exact amount, of energy for the entire municipality. In the case of Karachi, you have trash is obviously mixed in the landfill. So conceivably, how many different categories, if any, would it have to be sorted into? Also, is it feasible to do some sort of capture of the byproduct air pollutants? And if so, how would that be done?
So that's an excellent example, excellent question. So that's oftentimes when we're trying to implement a technology or a system in I like to call them countries with economies in transition compared to Western countries. The composition of the solid waste, as you mentioned, is different. It's a lot of the European countries, United States, we use a lot of plastic. And we have a on-site storage and collection system that we use to separate these materials, these resources at the site. I have in Gilbert in Arizona, I have 2 bins where I can select it, pre-select them with paper, plastics, all of that then goes into a material recovery facility from where it can be separated further. So this oftentimes is is eliminated from the solid waste system in countries with economies in transition. So in this case, what typically is probably one of the prudent ways to solve the issue is have transfer facilities. The transfer facilities, if it cannot be implemented on-site selection and storage, the transfer facilities, some kind of, should I say, selection be implemented. And in many cases, depending on the solid waste, what is combustible, what is not combustible, we, or the transfer facilities, we can eliminate a lot of the impurities, especially if there's chemicals that can cause problems like fires, explosions, and so on. This is what typically it's happening at the transfer facilities. This will also provide for jobs, local jobs, which is critical. But that's unless you want to implement a system where you have a on-site separation and storage, and then followed by material recovery facility. That's probably the best option. And in Finland, they have that. In Europe, they can separate in 3 or 4 bins, typically. Paper, plastics, and all of that can be mixed. I hope that answers your question. I think that was your question. How can we do it, correct?
Okay, I think there's a little bit more to the question.
Sorry, that was one question. The second part of the question was, after burning all of this, you hit on, what was it? Fly ash. But I didn't catch you touching upon how to address air pollutants as a byproducts from the process.
Okay, that's an excellent question, because improper incineration can cause a lot of fly ash. Let me kind of define what a fly ash. Fly ash is basically everything that flies up and can go into the environment and eventually settles. Primarily during the incineration, PM 2.5s are being generated. These PM 2.5s can get into your lungs, and over long-term exposure can cause problems, health problems, including cancer. So you want to eliminate these. And there's different technologies depending on what type of materials you're combusting. You may have to include scrubbers, which are wet scrubbers, or you may have to slurry scrubbers, or even dry scrubbers to remove these particles. There are also baghouse technologies that can be implemented to remove the particulate matter. Now, in the United States, we use, especially for power plants, large power plants called power plants, we oftentimes use electrostatic precipitators, which are very effective, but can require a lot of electricity. Now, it is the issue why I say you can use different types of scrubbers is depends on the materials that you're burning. For example, if you're burning PVC, a lot of PVC plastic, you will be generating, or sulfur-containing type of refuse, you will be generating a lot of acid gases, hydrochloric, hydrogen chloride, sulfur dioxide, NOx, as we call it. So these need to be removed from the environment, because they can soak onto these fly ash particles. They can modify the fly ash particles. They can create problems with the air in form of reacting with the water and creating acid rain and similar type of aggressive types of chemicals. So the way you do that, you use slurry scrubbers or dry scrubbers or even wet scrubbers that contain an alkaline environment. And this is probably one of the best type of technology can be used. Now, again, a lot of companies in the United States can focus and provide the technical solution that is best depending on the characteristics of the process and the refuse derived fuel. But these are typical technologies that we typically use. I mean, I don't want to advertise, but there's plenty of fantastic companies and technologies.
Thanks for working that in, Dr. Hristovski.
We'll hit you up offline for the best companies.
I think we'll see if there's, we'll see if there are any questions from the virtual audience, and then I'll come back to you.
Oh, sure.
So, Keome, were there any other questions for our guests who are listening in?
Yes, we do. We have Mr. Jafar Hassan with his hand raised. So if my colleagues can unmute him so he can answer his question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm assuming, Keome, so you can let me know if there's a problem with the line. This is Jafar Hasnain. I'm with C-SPIRE Advisors in
We can
Chicago.
hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Perfect. This is Jafar Hasnain with C-SPIRE Advisors in Chicago. Thank you for organizing this this platform. It's fantastic, very timely. This question is for Minister Shaikh and his team. First of all, congratulations on the setting up the regulations and the policies around waste to energy. It's timely and it's much needed. As somebody who was just in Karachi for a couple of weeks, a week ago, I think things are headed in the right direction. My question relates to something that you touched on, which also relates to the business model question that was asked earlier. How are you and your team in Sindh looking at innovative solutions, innovative technologies that can be brought to bear to solve Karachi's very unique problems? Because as we know, and we work in these areas, unlike solar and wind, where the feedstock is pretty well known, the feedstock in waste is quite variable. So, you know, if we were to bring in an innovative, unusual technology, how would you all perceive that and respond? Thank you.
See, this is for the first time, as I told you, that in the country we have formulated the policy. We welcome all any innovative policy and any innovative ways and means to do our job. So we'll be, as I told you, we'll be waiting for any developer to come up and contact us. So we have opened the ground for them as well by the unsolicited proposals. So they can propose anything, maybe the new technology, and because of this, the new technology, we have opened up this thing in the ARE policy or renewable policy 2019, which was implemented in 2019. So anybody who is with innovative techniques and the policy, they are most welcome, and definitely we have our technical team to see to any proposals coming up with us. Energy department and the solid waste management board will have a team of the experts with us, and so that we can evaluate and then find out if anything is there which is with the policy, so we can adopt that and we can go for that. So everybody is welcome.
Thanks for that question, Jafar. I saw a hand in here from Naeem Mughal, who is the Director General of the Sindh Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Professor, for a very comprehensive presentation. I just wanted to inform that Sindh has Environmental Protection Act of 2014, which covers with some kind of regulations and environmental standards. We have environmental quality standards for ambient air quality and the stack emissions. So I think we can make check on the pollutants which will be contributing towards air pollution, and we also have to check on the bottom ash. We have hazardous waste management regulations to check on disposal of the bottom ash, as well as we have one more instrument, I would say, the environmental impact assessment. Before we go for any incineration process or any development process, then we have to carry out environmental impact assessment in order to ascertain the foreseeable impacts and to check mitigation and management of all impacts which are possibly coming from the incineration processes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mughal. Keome, were there any other questions from our virtual audience?
Yes, there's one from Prefer K Daily. This is for our keynote professor. Are you familiar with pyrolysis? It's spelled Pyrolysis, because incineration is no longer an acceptable technology. Would you care to talk on that more?
I would disagree that this incineration is not acceptable technology. Pyrolysis basically is a new, it's not new technology, but it's quite more and more used. It produces syngas. The general idea is to produce the syngas that can be transported. One has to be properly trained for this type of technology. And it also produces a lot of ash that can, depending on the source, can be used as a carbon supplement for carbon poor soils. Now, again, this has to be taken with a grain of salt, because depending on the impurities of the solid waste during this process, heavy metals or similar contaminants may be introduced to soils. And when we were working with, a simple example of that, as we were doing pyrolysis and incineration of biosolids, we found out a lot of nanomaterials, for example, that we use, that are in our wastewater and we use in daily products, are being accumulated into the soil. So that could be a very difficult thin line to walk, and one has to be very careful. Now, the good side of pyrolysis is that you can produce actually a fuel, a syngas, and syngas typically contains about 30 to 60% carbon monoxide, typically about 25 to 30% hydrogen and some methane, that eventually can be used to produce fuel, whether that's methanol, or it's other liquid fuel using Fischer-Tropsch reaction, or it can be incinerated to produce a lot of energy. It's a good technology. With the advent of process control and computers, it's being advanced more rapidly. But I would again tend to disagree that a lot of standard conventional type of incineration processes are becoming obsolete.
Okay, I think we have time for probably one or two more questions. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to ask a question or make a comment?
Thank you. This is Essen from Engro, and I would like to make one comment which would clarify a few questions that were just posed to Minister Energy. Actually, we have been studying a project since 2019 along with Government of Sindh and K Electric. And this project was to study the type of waste generated in Karachi. I'm very glad to see that the numbers quoted by the administrator and the minister are slightly less compared to what they were in 2019, which shows us that the amount of waste being generated now has reduced to a certain extent. So we started working on a feasibility or a study to generate electricity through waste. And we found out that the tariff that was coming out through this waste was slightly higher than the current tariff, which is already considered to be very expensive. So it wasn't considered worthwhile to progress in that direction. And therefore, the study was deflected or diverted towards RDF that we are talking about today. And as far as RDF is concerned, RDF technology is being used in Pakistan, at least on two various projects where RDF is being used in DG Khan cement and other cement industries. So as far as RDF is concerned, in Pakistan, the calorific value, as the DG Solid Waste Management has just said, is slightly less than the indigenous coal. It is around 3.3 MMBTU versus 5 MMBTU of imported coal. So it's a very worthwhile option available to us. Now, the only thing which was unclear then in 2019 was what is the policy around it? And we are very happy to note today that the policy is being made. And in fact, we just heard that the waste would be available on free basis. I would have been much happier had the government decided for giving us a tipping fee also to pick the waste up, but that's fine, we'll help each other out, no problem. So if on the basis of free waste, a model is constructed, a business model is constructed, a couple of things needs to be done. First, the due diligence, as the professor has highlighted again and again, a due diligence needs to be done. In a country like ours, the composition of waste changes not just because of the winter and summer, it changes because of the festivities in the country. It changes in Ramadan, it changes in various Eid festival days, and it fluctuates from 13,000 tons to 18,000 tons, during the festivities. So that due diligence needs to be done, and then a 15-month feasibility study has to be carried out before we decide. But the bottom line of whatever studies have been conducted by us, by K-Electric, and by Government of Sindh tells us that RDF to energy, which is producing steam, is the way to go rather than producing electricity, because right now in our country, there's an issue of surplus generation, at least currently, okay, for the next couple of years or so. So the way to go would be to work in RDF and to use RDF to create steam and use steam in the cement plants or other. And the calorific value is fantastic. And the composition of the waste that we have is, including the organic waste, is quite healthy. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Hristovski, I'm not sure if you would have any remarks that you'd like to make as we begin to close the program.
The gentleman just made a very, very valid point that I agree. And there is, again, there is a multiple benefits of what he said, especially that a lot of these facilities can reduce the hazardous waste, because the cement generation plants, when you use the waste as a co-fuel, can immobilize the hazardous waste and can reduce a lot of special waste. They can utilize a lot of tires. They can utilize a lot of chemical waste as a fuel source. So you are achieving multiple benefits, or should I say benefits on multiple fronts. So I'm glad, I'm happy to hear that they're doing an in-depth analysis of these processes.
All right, Dr. Hristovski, I'm glad we're going to leave you on a happy note. Thank you so much for joining us and for your presentation. And thanks to those of you who are online. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, so we'll collect those from the chat box and follow up after. And to those in the room, thank you so much for coming. And I'm just going to turn it over to the Consul General.
Thanks, Eileen. Dr. Kiril, thank you so much for your time, for your presentation, for your expertise. Everyone who's joined us this evening, guests here in person, guests virtually from around the world, thank you so much for joining us. We've learned an awful lot about waste to energy. We've heard about the technical aspects. I know far more about incinerators than I did just an hour ago, and that's exciting, actually. We've learned about the technical aspects of converting trash to power. We've learned how important it is, as we just heard from our guest Ihsan, that there is a policy framework and a policy willingness to support the frameworks that business is looking at implementing. And I think that frankly justifies our guest list in some ways, because we have a lot of members from business and the critical public sector policymakers here. And I'm so glad to see that clearly this is a group that already is frequently interacting and producing a tremendous amount of energy in their own right as well. So thank you all. We've accomplished already what we set out to do. That's gathering these experts to hear about waste to energy, solutions for Karachi, and to generate new ideas. I'm excited about what we've heard from particularly Minister Imtiaz and Rowe and so many others. The government of the United States, like the government of Pakistan, values protecting the environment, reducing emissions, and supporting efforts to advance new technologies, to advocate, to provide activism and across-the-board engagement in the transition to clean energy and environmental protection. And let's also be honest, Professor, as you started by describing waste as money, there is an incredibly important profit-making potential in these technologies, and we're not asking all of our guests to be altruists by any means. And that's an exciting prospect as well. Market forces have been incredible drivers of the clean energy transition worldwide, and I'm certain that Pakistan will not be any different in that regard. Coming on the heels of COP26 and the new policy for Sindh on waste energy, this seminar really could not be timelier. And I do not want to end on what is for we diplomats a very customary note. Let's keep this discussion going. That's happening already, and that seems a little bit anticlimactic for the stage in which we find ourselves tonight. But I would, however, ask you to consider this exchange and the actions that Sindh government and some of our other guests from the private sector have taken as a call to action, as a challenge. And we certainly hope that others will one-up some of our guests in some of the steps that they've made. I encourage everyone here to actively think about how to put the recommendations we've heard today into practice. And I can promise you all that the U.S. Consulate, the U.S. mission to Pakistan, and the U.S. government will do everything we can to support these very worthwhile efforts across Pakistan and even more broadly. I hope the discussion today is the start of a longer conversation and many conversations. And we look forward to watching these next steps turn trash into energy, to turn garbage into gold, and to contribute to a cleaner, more energy secure Karachi and Pakistan. And so, Dr. Kiril, thank you very much. To all our guests virtually in here, thank you so very much. And I hope everyone has a great night and a lot of food for thought moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.